I remember walking into Mr. Grant's office that morning with the kind of tight-lipped calm only experience breeds. The scent of paper, coffee, and faint printer toner hung in the air, mixing with tension so thick I could almost cut it with a letter opener. He was standing behind his desk, hands trembling as he tried to close a thick folder. The snap echoed, startling in its clarity. Then, in a lowered, almost fearful voice, he said, "If your name is still attached to that property, you could be liable for over $500,000. I froze, the words sinking like an ice cube into my chest, but I didn't panic. Not even for a second. My mind immediately mapped every possible scenario, every loophole, every risk Ethan might have overlooked. Rookie move, I thought. No way he expected this house to be anything but a trophy. Mr. Grant shifted, hesitated, and for a fleeting second, his hand almost dropped the folder. The hesitation wasn't weakness, it was proof he understood the stakes. His eyes flicked to me, silent acknowledgement passing between us. I just wanted to make sure you knew, he muttered, voice tight. Flashback, divorce court. Ethan had been perfectly polished, smiling as the judge signed over nearly everything. Our joint accounts. Cars. Vacation properties. And the house, our dream home. Gone. He had taken it all, smug, composed, confident in his perceived cleverness. I had smiled at him then, nodded politely, and retreated into quiet observation, storing every detail in the vault of my mind. Back in the office, I surveyed the files. Notarized documents. LLC registrations that didn't match state records. Signatures dated before official transfer dates. Audit trails untouched. Every anomaly, every inconsistency was a whisper of leverage, a small seed of inevitable exposure. My lips remained tight, my thoughts running fast. He thinks this is clean. Rookie mistake, I mused quietly. A subtle vibration pulled my attention to my phone. Messages from Lisa, my quiet anchor. Her replies were sparse, coded, affirming. She didn't need to know the details, only that I was calm, calculating, and control. My emotional mirror and a small comfort in a storm of legal chaos. Mr. Grant gestured at the thick folders. There are shell companies linked to the property, he said, voice low, unreported accounts, trust discrepancies, and a zoning audit that flagged multiple violations. Anyone claiming ownership could face serious federal liability, including him. I leaned forward, scanning the files. One clause caught my eye, assigned a week before the court date, unchallenged, buried in fine print. Another anomaly, a notarized signature that didn't match county records. Microtwist 1. Microtwist 2. My mind cataloged them like pieces of a chessboard. Sunlight cut across the desk, slanting through the blinds, highlighting the embossed county seal. I imagined Ethan walking into the house he thought he owned, unaware of the legal web tightening around him. Each unreported account, each overlooked trust, each misfiled LLC was a domino waiting for its fall. No dramatic confrontation needed. Justice didn't shout, it whispered in precise documentation. I organized the files, scanning timestamps, cross-referencing documents. Mr. Grant's hands trembled slightly again as he handed me a small flash drive. Everything we have so far, he said. Keep it secure. And don't share it with anyone not cleared. I slid it into my bag, calm as ever, already envisioning the next phase. Slow exposure, controlled reveals, undeniable leverage. A soft microtwist appeared in my mind. Ethan's assistant had forwarded a property inspection report to the wrong email weeks ago, a mistake that no one noticed. Microtwist 3. Tiny cracks in a facade he thought perfect. I noted it silently, filing it away. Another subtle clue, an unmarked envelope I had glimpsed in his filing cabinet days before. Noted, recorded, ready for later. I replayed the months leading up to the divorce. Casual dinners where he bragged about finalizing early, late-night calls to mysterious contacts, subtle mentions of skipping inspections. I had smiled, nodded, filed every detail. Those moments, seemingly mundane, were the invisible threads of my web. The room hummed quietly, the copier, keyboards, low chatter, but inside, I was in complete control. No one else noticed the microtwists stacking silently. Outside, calm. Inside, a meticulously arranged trap. Every anomaly, every missed signature, every overlooked clause was a small, inevitable victory in progress. I felt the weight of the flash drive in my bag, a quiet promise of things to come. Mr. Grant's gaze lingered on me. He knew, as I did, that this was only the beginning. The house, the accounts, the divorce, they all seemed lost, but they weren't. They were merely the opening moves in a game Ethan didn't even realize he was playing. As I stepped out of the office, city life hummed obliviously around me. Cars, people, traffic lights, normalcy continued outside, while inside, a storm of quiet strategy had begun. I smiled faintly, the first strategic confidence settling in. He thinks he walked away clean, but he just stepped into a trap he couldn't see. I didn't tell Mr. Grant everything that morning. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I'd learned something very early in my marriage. Information was power, and power worked best when it stayed quiet. When I walked out of his office, the city felt louder than usual. Car horns, heels on pavement, someone laughing too hard near the coffee shop. Normal life. Meanwhile, my name was still attached to a house that carried more risk than I'd ever imagined. Over $500,000 in potential liability, sitting there like a loaded weapon, waiting for the wrong signature to pull the trigger. Ethan used to say I overthought things. Turns out, I'd just been thinking ahead. 2 weeks earlier, during the divorce mediation, Ethan had leaned back in his chair like he was closing a real estate deal instead of a marriage. Calm smile. Perfect hair. The kind of guy who thought confidence alone could rewrite reality. He slid the settlement agreement across the table and said, "You walk away clean. I take the house." Simple. Simple. That word should have been my first red flag. The house wasn't just a house. It was wrapped inside an LLC Ethan had set up 6 months before filing for divorce, quietly, efficiently, without my name listed as a managing member. At least, that's what he wanted me to believe. I noticed the paperwork then, but I didn't challenge it. Rookie move on his part, not mine. At the time, I nodded, signed where my attorney pointed, and let Ethan think he'd won. I'd learned long ago that men like him only exposed their mistakes when they thought the game was over. Back in my apartment, I laid the documents out on the dining table, lining them up like puzzle pieces. Settlement agreement. Property transfer. LLC operating agreement. A notarized waiver dated exactly 1 week before our final court appearance. That date stuck with me. Too convenient. Too rushed. I poured myself a glass of water and stared at the waiver again. It released me from direct ownership claims, but the language around liability was vague, almost lazy. Whoever drafted it assumed no one would look closely. That assumption alone told me everything about Ethan's mindset. I called Lisa that night. She'd been my emotional mirror since college, the friend who didn't sugarcoat and didn't panic. "He thinks he's untouchable," she said after I explained. "He always did," I replied. "That's why I'm letting him walk." Walk where? Straight into his own paperwork. What Ethan didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that during the marriage, I'd handled most of our household finances. Quietly. Boring spreadsheets. Monthly reconciliations. The stuff he waved off as your thing. He trusted me with numbers because he didn't respect them. Or me. That's how I knew the mortgage payments on the house had changed 3 months before the divorce. Increased. Slightly irregular. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger alarms, but enough to raise eyebrows if someone bothered to look. I did. I requested a full payment history from the bank, framing it as a routine audit request. The loan officer didn't push back. Professionals rarely do when you sound calm and specific. The statement came in 2 days later, and there it was, late fees buried under administrative adjustments, followed by a restructuring notice that hadn't been sent to my address. Interesting. I forwarded the file to Mr. Grant with a single line. "Does this affect liability if my name was attached at the time?" He called me within 10 minutes. His voice was lower this time. Controlled. "It changes everything," he said. The house wasn't just under financial strain, it was flagged internally for review. An audit trigger. Which meant that once the investigation completed, responsibility wouldn't fall on ownership alone. It would fall on signatures, dates, intent. And suddenly, Ethan's rush to take the house made perfect sense. He texted me that evening. "Everything okay with the paperwork?" My attorney said it's all wrapped up. I stared at the screen before typing back. "All good. Glad it's behind us." Behind us. Ahead of him. The next micro-twist came from someone I hadn't expected to hear from again, Rachel. She'd been Ethan's loudest supporter during the divorce, always posting vague quotes about loyalty and truth. She called, voice therapy, asking if I'd left any personal files at the house. "No," I said. "Why?" Oh, just checking. Ethan's cleaning things out. Cleaning things out meant shredding. I made a note of the date and time. Evidence of intent mattered more than evidence of guilt. That night, I backed up everything, documents, emails, timestamps, to a flash drive and stored it with a friend. Not out of fear. Out of discipline. By the time Ethan finalized the property transfer, he believed the narrative completely. He'd taken the house. He'd taken control. He'd taken what he thought was the last word. What he didn't realize was that investigations don't move loudly at first. They move quietly, through locked doors and lowered voices. Through people like Mr. Grant, who start double-checking signatures and pausing before they speak. As I turned off the lights and sat in the silence, I felt something unexpected. Not anger, not sadness. Clarity. He thought the house was his victory. But victories built on shortcuts don't last. And the system he'd tried to game was already watching. The bank officer closed the glass door behind us, slower than necessary. I noticed his hand hesitate on the handle, like he was buying himself a few extra seconds. His badge read Daniel Brooks. Regional Compliance. He didn't sit right away. He opened a thin folder, flipped it closed again, then finally looked at me. For a few seconds, he said nothing. Just breathed. Before I say anything else, he finally said, "I need to ask if you have a minor child." The question landed heavier than it should have. I answered calmly, "Yes." He nodded once, almost to himself. Then he lowered his voice. "If your ex-husband finalized the divorce while this property was under investigation, and your name was removed through that LLC transfer, you may still be legally exposed for up to $487,000. For a moment, the room felt smaller. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just tight. Panic wastes time. Numbers don't. I nodded once. He slid the folder toward me. Inside were transaction logs, inspection flags, and a compliance timeline that didn't match the story Ethan had told the court. Daniel added quietly, and because the structure was altered after the initial flag, this is no longer civil only. It's being reviewed. Reviewed meant audited. Audited meant frozen. Frozen meant nobody could outrun it. As I scanned the pages, I realized this wasn't just about a house. It never was. A year earlier, during the divorce, Ethan had smiled the entire time. He acted like a man relieved to be free, generous even. He took the house, the accounts, the investments. I took what he called peace. People congratulated him. Told me I was brave. I remembered thinking the math didn't make sense. The house alone had been valued at $910,000. He walked away insisting it was a liability, that repairs were bleeding him dry, that I was lucky not to be stuck with it. Rookie move. I signed the settlement calmly. No argument. No drama. What Ethan didn't notice was how carefully I read every clause, especially the one added 7 days before the final hearing. A transfer of interest waiver, notarized, attached to an LLC I'd never heard of. At the time, I flagged it quietly. My attorney advised patience. So I waited. Daniel tapped one line on the report. "This inspection request was filed 3 months before your divorce finalized," he said. "Environmental compliance. Possible zoning fraud." The LLC tried to shield it. He paused. "That doesn't work once an audit starts." I leaned back, letting that settle. Ethan had rushed. He always rushed when he thought he was winning. That night, I spread the documents across my kitchen table again. Same routine. Same lamp. Same silence. Only now the pattern was sharper. Payments routed through shell accounts. Repairs invoiced to a construction company that didn't exist. A tax abatement application signed by someone using Ethan's middle initial wrong. Small things. Sloppy things. My phone buzzed while I was highlighting ledger entries. "Ethan." A text. "All done on my end. House is officially my headache now. Glad that's behind us." I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then placed the phone face down. He really believed it. Belief is dangerous when paperwork disagrees. I called my friend Lisa, not for advice, just to hear another human breathe. She listened quietly, then said, "So he thinks he buried you?" I smiled faintly. "He thinks I disappeared." The next microcrack came 2 days later. A woman named Rachel emailed me. Ethan's financial consultant. Or so he called her. Her tone was warm, supportive, almost friendly. She asked if I'd be willing to confirm I had no remaining interest in the property, just to clean things up. That phrase again. Clean things up. I forwarded the email to Mr. Grant without replying. He called me within minutes. Do not answer her, he said. She's fishing for written confirmation. And she's panicking. Panicking people rush. Calm people wait. He added, this property has been flagged across 3 systems now. Bank, county, and state compliance. Flagged. Repeated words matter. Fear sticks when language repeats. What Ethan didn't know was that the bank wasn't the only authority watching. A quiet audit had been triggered when inspection reports didn't match renovation permits. The house wasn't just under investigation. It was frozen. Tagged. Any asset tied to it was radioactive. Including the LLC. Including him. Including any attempt to move money out. The irony was clean and sharp. He'd taken everything, so I'd have nothing to lose. By the end of that week, I requested certified copies of every document tied to the property. I didn't rush. I didn't confront. I organized. Dates. Signatures. Gaps. One afternoon, as I highlighted a ledger entry, something clicked. A payment-marked consulting fee, exactly $32,500, issued 2 days after the divorce decree. That wasn't consulting. That was silence money. I sat back, breath steady, pulse not. For the first time, I allowed myself one quiet thought. If this escalates, it won't stay financial. That's when the letter arrived. Federal header. Neutral language. No accusations. Just a notice of review. My name appeared once. Ethan's appeared 6 times. I folded the paper carefully and placed it with the rest. This is the part where most people would confront. Demand answers. I didn't. If you're still with me right now, you already know why. Because the system only works when you let it. And Ethan was about to learn that the paperwork he used to erase me was the same paperwork that would trap him. He thought the divorce was the end. It was just the midpoint. And once the system starts, it never asks permission. I didn't tell Ethan anything when the letter arrived. It came on a Tuesday, plain white envelope, no logo on the front, just my name printed with machine precision. I knew before I opened it what it was, not because I'd seen one before, but because my lawyer had warned me how silence usually sounds before the system speaks. I sat at the same kitchen table where I'd been quietly mapping his numbers for months, slid a finger under the seal, and read the first line twice to make sure my eyes weren't rushing ahead of my mind. Notice of inquiry. Preliminary federal review. Environmental compliance overlap with financial misrepresentation. They weren't accusing yet. They were circling. And once they circle, they don't ask for permission. I folded the letter back into its envelope, placed it neatly into the folder I'd started calling after, and went about my day like nothing had changed, because on the outside, nothing had. Ethan still believed the divorce had closed the book. He texted me that afternoon like a man who thought he'd already won, casual, almost bored, telling me he'd handled the last loose ends, and that I didn't need to worry about anything tied to the old property. That phrase again. Handled. Men like Ethan loved that word. It made messes sound like chores. I didn't reply. Silence does something interesting to people who mistake control for intelligence. They start narrating their own downfall out loud. 2 days later, my lawyer called me into her office. Same calm tone she always used, same posture, same legal pad untouched on her desk. She told me the bank had officially flagged the property trust and that an audit trigger had been pulled because Ethan's LLC filings didn't match the environmental clearance timeline. She repeated one word 3 times in that meeting. Flagged. Flagged meant frozen accounts, delayed transfers, and eyes everywhere. She asked me one question that mattered more than anything else. Had I signed anything after the divorce that reassigned liability? I told her no. I never signed without reading. She nodded once, slowly, like a doctor confirming a pulse. That night, Ethan called. Not angry. Not panicked. Confident. He joked about how bureaucrats loved paperwork and how this would blow over once the right person was paid the right fee. I listened, said almost nothing, let him talk himself into believing the system still bent for him. When he hung up, I checked my email. There it was. A forwarded message from Rachel dated 3 months back, buried in an old thread I'd archived without thinking. An invoice attachment labeled Cleanup Services. $32,500. Same amount the bank had flagged as silence money. Same shell company. Same wrong middle initial. It wasn't new information. It was confirmation. And confirmation is heavier than discovery because it removes hope from the equation. The next week unfolded quietly, but not gently. Ethan's attorney withdrew due to a conflict of interest. The construction firm he'd used stopped answering calls. His credit line extension was denied without explanation. Every small inconvenience stacked into something larger, like gravity finally being acknowledged. Meanwhile, I was asked to provide documents. Not demanded. Asked. There's a difference. I gave them everything. Clean copies. Highlighted sections. Timelines that spoke for themselves. I watched Ethan unravel from a distance, his confidence leaking through short texts and missed calls, his tone shifting from assured to irritated to sharp. Still, no apologies. Just frustration that the machine wasn't listening to him anymore. The moment I knew it was irreversible came in a courthouse hallway I hadn't planned on visiting yet. I was there for something unrelated, or so it seemed, when a clerk asked me to confirm my name and handed me a stamped copy of a filing I hadn't submitted. Ethan had tried to preemptively shift responsibility back onto me using an outdated waiver. Clause he thought still applied. Thought. The clerk didn't meet my eyes when she said it wouldn't hold. Laws change. Context matters. Dates matter more. Ethan had filed too late, too sloppily, too sure of himself. By the time he realized the system wasn't confused, just patient, it had already categorized him correctly. That evening, as I tucked my child into bed, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Not relief. Certainty. The kind that settles into your bones when you know the next chapter isn't about survival anymore. Ethan believed the noise meant resistance. He didn't understand that quiet meant completion. And while he scrambled to fix what he thought was broken, the system was simply doing what it always does when given clean information. It was closing in, methodically, without emotion, without haste. The divorce had ended our marriage. This part was ending his illusion of control. And once the process starts, it never asks permission. I remember the exact sound the courthouse door made when it closed behind me that morning. Not loud, not dramatic, just a soft, final click, like the system quietly confirming something it had already decided. I stood there for a second longer than necessary, the stamped papers warm in my hand, my name printed cleanly at the top, spelled correctly this time. No missing middle initial, no room for excuses. Outside, the city moved like nothing had happened. Cars rolled by, someone laughed on a phone call, a food truck vent hissed open. The world didn't pause for justice, and I didn't need it to. By the time I got to my car, my phone buzzed twice. One message from my attorney, short and professional, asset freeze confirmed. Investigation officially escalated. Another from an unknown number that I already knew was Ethan. Relax. This is just paperwork. I handled it. I stared at that line for a long second, not angry, not satisfied, just aware of how perfectly it captured him. He still thought confidence could override process. He still thought charm worked on systems that only understood numbers. I put the phone face down and drove home. The house was quiet when I walked in, smaller than the one I'd signed away, but it felt solid in a way the old place never had. My son was at school. The kitchen window let in clean afternoon light. I set the documents on the counter next to the mail, right beside a federal notice I hadn't opened yet, because I already knew what it said. Later, my lawyer would confirm it in precise language. Environmental violations tied to the property, falsified remediation invoices, shell companies linked back through an LLC chain that ended, unmistakably, with Ethan's signature. The house wasn't just under investigation. It had been for years. The timing of the divorce hadn't saved him. It had exposed him. That afternoon, a compliance officer from the bank called again, voice lower than before, almost careful. She explained how accounts connected to the property were frozen pending audit, how withdrawals over $32,000 were flagged retroactively, how responsibility followed control, not intention. She didn't sound angry. She sounded done. When she said my name, it was to clarify that I was no longer listed as a liable party. You're clear, she said. But your ex-husband isn't. I thanked her and hung up, my hands steady, my chest quiet. The relief wasn't sharp. It was slow, spreading, like warmth after a long cold stretch. That evening, Lisa came by with takeout we didn't touch much. She watched me read through the final settlement addendum again, then looked up and said, "So this is really it?" I nodded. Yeah. This is it. We didn't toast. We didn't celebrate. We talked about school pickup schedules and how much rent was going up next year and whether I should finally replace my old laptop. Normal things. Real things. Later that night, after my son was asleep, my phone buzzed again. This time Ethan called. I let it go to voicemail. His message was clipped, irritation bleeding through the forced calm. He said the bank was overreacting, that his lawyer said it would blow over, that I needed to sign one more clarification to speed things up. I deleted it without responding. An hour later, a second voicemail came in, shorter, less controlled. By the third, his voice had changed completely, the confidence gone, replaced by something thin and sharp. He asked if I'd known. He didn't ask how long. He asked if I'd known. I didn't reply. The next morning, a news alert crossed my screen while I was packing lunches. A local business owner under federal review. No names yet. Just numbers. Improper filings. Environmental fraud. Potential criminal liability. I turned the notification off and finished packing the apples. Weeks passed. The investigation moved the way investigations always do, slowly, methodically, without drama. Ethan tried once more to reach me through Rachel, but her message was vague, non-committal, and ended with, "I can't get involved anymore." She never called again. At mediation, his chair was empty. His attorney requested continuances that weren't granted. The system didn't care about his stress, his reputation, his explanations. It cared about documents, timelines, signatures. Everything he'd rushed through to feel smart came back, line by line, exactly as written. On the day the final notice arrived clearing me completely, I didn't cry. I sat on the floor of my small living room, back against the couch, and let the silence settle. No alarms. No threats. Just quiet. If you've ever stayed in something too long because leaving felt like failure, you probably understand this part. The win isn't loud. It doesn't look like revenge. It looks like peace showing up without asking permission. I don't know what will happen to Ethan. That's not my job anymore. I know what happened to me. I kept my name clean. I protected my child. I learned the difference between love and control, between trust and paperwork. And if this story feels familiar, if you're watching it thinking you should probably read the fine print one more time, do it. Sometimes that's all it takes. I'm not rich. I'm free.